Once again, thank you to FlexJ Productions for the suggestion. Any feedback and video suggestions from you guys greatly helps out this channel, so please keep them coming. Welcome back to Mega Man Character Files, the show where we look at the in-depth histories of various Mega Man characters who are relevant to our what-ifs. Today, we will be talking about the original Zero, the God of Destruction, the Messiah himself, Omega. Omega technically appeared at the end credits scene of Mega Man Zero 2, but wouldn't make his actual on-screen appearance until Mega Man Zero 3. Now, before we go into his actual history and everything, we are going to have to go over some background on the Elf Wars and how they started. Sometime near the later years of 21XX, after the Mega Man X series has wrapped up, Zero decided to turn himself over to the Maverick Hunters and the Reploid scientists in order to study his body in order to try to find a cure for the Maverick virus, as he learned back in Mega Man X4 and X5 that the Maverick virus originated from his body. Two of these scientists were actually able to make a cure, one of them being a human scientist named Dr. Weil. They had created a living AI program known as the Mother Elf. The Mother Elf had the power to essentially rewrite the data of all living Reploids, which would be able to completely eliminate the Maverick virus. However, there was a bit of a debate on what should be done. X, who was heralded as the new leader of humanity, thought that they should use the Mother Elf to eliminate all possibility of the Maverick virus, making it so that the Maverick virus would never turn any Reploid Maverick again. However, Weil voted against this, stating that Reploids could still go Maverick of their own free will or through defects, and he wanted to use the Mother Elf to fully take control of all Reploids. Weil's plan was rejected, and X's was approved, and thanks to that, there were no Mavericks for a good portion of time. There was actually a bit of a time of peace. That is, until Weil cloned the Mother Elf into two beings known as the Baby Elves, and also stole Zero's body since his mind was separated from his body during the research on trying to create the Mother Elf, and then used the Baby Elves to take control of a bunch of Reploids, turning them into Mavericks, and then started a war. He then upgraded Zero's body and implanted a new personality in it known as Omega. With his army of Mavericks and Omega at his side, he laid waste to the entire world. No one could stop Weil and Omega. That is, until X got a copy body of Zero's created and put Zero's mind back in it. Together, they were able to defeat Omega and stop Weil from getting hold of the Mother Elf. However, they were unable to destroy Omega. His body was just too powerful. So they strapped him to a rocket and sent him out into space. And they forced Weil to be put into a cybernetic body so he could live forever and just wander the wastes that he created. However, Weil knew that Omega was far stronger than they thought he was. Even with his immobilized state, he should have been able to bust out of that spacecraft at any time. So he bided his time and waited until the perfect moment. That moment came when the Mother Elf, now known as the Dark Elf due to being corrupted by Weil, was released. The Resistance had been trying to track down the Dark Elf for some time now after it was released, and they finally did track a signal, which came from a downed space shuttle. As Zero goes in to investigate, yes, Zero's back, that's a whole thing we'll cover when we talk about Zero in the near future, he sees two of the Guardians fighting Fafnir and Fairy Leviathan getting destroyed by some large Reploid that he doesn't seem to remember. Zero had amnesia at this point in the plot, so he didn't remember who Omega was or that he actually fought him before. Zero tells the two to leave as he'll handle this, and he fights Omega. While he is able to beat Omega, Omega's body easily regenerates. That's when Harpooya, another one of the Guardians, shows up and tries to defeat Omega as well. Despite the Guardians and Zero being enemies, they all wanted to work together in order to defeat Omega. But Omega regenerates again, and that is when Weil reveals himself. Before Harpooya can try to attack him as well, Copy X shows up again, who was revived by Weil. We'll talk about that whenever we do Copy X's character file. Copy X would then tell Harpooya that he has pardoned Weil and Omega for their crimes and is now having them serve under him. With that, they all teleport away. Omega wouldn't be seen again until about halfway through the game, where Weil stuffed him into a missile and launched it at Neo Arcadia in order to have him land right by the Dark Elf. Using him and the baby elves, he was able to merge with the Mother Elf and get some pretty snazzy golden armor. As he then sees Zero, he goes up to try to kill him, but Harpooya shows up again trying to get revenge. However, Omega easily destroys Harpooya, and Ciel has to teleport him and Zero out of the area before both of them get annihilated. With Omega now merged with the Dark Elf's power, he has the ability to control the minds of all Reploids, except for Zero, considering that the Dark Elf/Mother Elf was made from his own mind. And thanks to that, Omega tests out this ability by taking control of all of the Reploids in the Resistance. But before they can shoot Zero and Ciel down, the real X appears and uses the last bits of his power in order to bring them all back to their senses. Zero then goes to sub-Neo Arcadia in order to put Omega down once and for all, and is actually able to take down his golden armor form. But Omega is far from finished, as he then uses more power of the Dark Elf to transform into a gargantuan form. This form resembling a merging of X and Zero, trying to represent their fights during the Elf Wars, but not their heroism for actually stopping Omega, but rather all of the slaughter and bloodshed that they caused. After managing to defeat that form, that is when Omega's true form is revealed, and Weil reveals to Zero the truth, that Omega was using Zero's original body, and that the body the current Zero was using was a fake. And in the flaming ruins of the original lab where Zero was found, their battle began, with Omega stating his most famous line. Zero would just barely be able to defeat Omega. However, the Dark Elf was still keeping Omega alive. That is, until the Guardians appeared to try to assist Zero. With their encouragement and some coaching from X, as well as the Dark Elf reverting back to the Mother Elf, Zero regained his strength and was able to deal the final blow to Omega. And that was the end of Omega. Or was it? An interesting thing to point out here is that a lot of people have a misconception about Omega, since Weil says he used Zero's original body, that Omega should have Zero's original look from the X series. But looking at concept art for Omega, that was never the case. Omega was always supposed to look like Zero from the Zero series, as that was the current body Zero was using at that time when he got his mind split away from his body. I know it is a bit confusing, and they could have elaborated a lot better on that, but yeah, that is what happened, and that is why Omega looks like that. Now then, in Mega Man ZX, which would come after the Mega Man Zero games, if you go back to Area N after you've already gone through it the first time, you can find a special secret. That's right, you get to fight Omega in an optional boss fight, But how did he survive, especially 200 years into the future? Well, there isn't really a clear answer, but there are little hints sprinkled throughout this section that do give us a big enough picture to figure out what might have happened. After you defeat Omega, or the resurrected Mavericks from Mega Man Zeroes 3 and 4, if you have those GBA games put in the GBA slot, you will find this rock. It's just kind of a rock floating there, but it can be used to turn into a biometal, meaning that it has the soul of Omega in it. But how did it wind up here? Well, Area N is also the place where Biometal Model W resides, which is a fragment of Ragnarok. That's a whole thing I'll talk about when we get to Dr. Wile's character file. Essentially a big old space station that crashed into the planet and has Wile's soul in it. So, it can be deduced that Omega was partially built into Ragnarok, and just a piece of Ragnarok that had him in it just kind of flew out here into Area N and has resurrected Omega, or at least a vision of him, as well as the other Mavericks that were under his command. And when you take this rock back to Guardian Base, no relation to the Guardians that were mentioned earlier in this character file, you can create Biometal Model O, which is the biometal that essentially turns either Vent or Ale into Omega. Now, other than Omega's presence being in the game, fighting him as well as getting Biometal Model O is not canon, at least from what we know from ZX Advent. All of that is considered non-canon, at least in the game timeline. But it's still a very interesting thing, especially since, canonically, Omega is just kind of floating around in that world. Omega has appeared in a couple pieces of other media, mainly in the Rockman Zero manga, starting in Volume 2 when things switch over to Part 2 and they get a lot less serious and a lot more goofy. Omega in the manga timeline is not Zero's original body put into a new body. It's just a dude. He's just a random Reploid who's kinda good with a spear that Dr. Wile hired. Yeah. He serves as Zero's main rival throughout Part 2, though they do eventually start working together, like when the zombies start showing up and they had to fight them off, as well as Zero actually saving Omega when he got captured in the ruins where the Dark Elf was being held. Omega would eventually try to destroy Zero with the newest invention that Dr. Wile made for him, an upgrade called Giant Omega DX. The problem was that he had to build it first, and he didn't really know how to do it, so he asked Zero if he would help, which Zero agrees. And when they finish building it, Omega tries to defeat him, but Zero didn't follow all of the steps, and it just kind of breaks, and then that's when Dr. Wile fires him. After Omega was fired, Dr. Wile would then create Rose, I'm just gonna say Rose, it's R-O-Z-E, a clone of Zero, which is the closest thing to Omega's true form that shows up in the manga. He fights Zero for a bit, Zero inevitably wins, and then he's just kind of out of the story for good. Model O also briefly appears, but not in the Zero manga, in the ZX manga, mainly the new reprints of it from 2020, where there is a bonus chapter where Ale, not Vent, despite Vent being the main character of the ZX manga, got Model O, even quoting him by saying, "I am the Messiah," when going to fight Prometheus and Pandora. It's never explained at all who Ale is in the manga, how she got Model O, or anything about that. It's just, she shows up, is cool for a second, and then the chapter ends. And Omega's final appearance in other media is in issue 55 of the Archie Mega Man comics, where Dr. Light gets hit with some temporal energy and sees visions of the future. This one, to be exact, depicting the events of the Elf Wars, though something very interesting, which I also pointed out in the Axel character file, go watch that, is that Axel is here alongside X and Zero. While in the actual Mega Man Zero games this is never stated, I like to think that this is canon. Gives Axel a more heroic death than just, I don't know, dying because Lumine got lodged in his head. And that was the character file for Omega, one of my favorite final bosses of all time. I hope you guys learned something new about this very cool character. I think it's very interesting, especially that I am the Messiah line. It can mean a lot of things if you dig into his character along with all the stories he is a part of. And he's just really cool, in my opinion. So let me know in the comments below if there are any other character files you'd like me to do in the future. Make sure you like and subscribe if you want more Character Files content, and I will see you guys next time.